Well, I mean, the first thing to say, I think, is that, and this is really part of the central thesis of this work, is that in terms of Machen, Van Til, and then their predecessor, Bavinck, um, these guys are all in agreement on, almost all of what it is that one ought to believe according to the scriptures, right? I think the difference that we're talking about is sometimes largely driven by personality. Can be have a huge amount to do with it. You see this in the Kuyper Bavinck relation. Of course, Bavinck did plenty of conjunctioning, if we could come up with a way of saying it. 90%, and I say this in the book, 90% of all his references to Schleiermacher are critiques. Now, I do still think that there is a difference in the way Bavinck did polemical theology versus a Machen, a Van Til, and a Kuyper. And I see personally that, again, like you said, this is an opinion question. My opinion would be, when I read Kuyper, when I read Machen and Van Til, I see a lot of personality similarities in the way that they express themselves. And Bavinck was a different sort. Not in the need for polemics, not in pushing the and the differences constantly, and calling out unbelief. He did those things absolutely, and one must. Bavinck was just he just had a very, very ironic bent to where he wanted to help, I think, bring people along and have some of these contemporary modernists as his interlocutors. And so, especially in his career, I mean, he saw his work in the philosophy of revelation, for example, and in some of his later essays, as being hoping that they would be in conversation with the guys that disagreed with him most. So he saw in his own career this kind of turn towards pushing Christianity in conversation with modernist post-Nietzschean Netherlands. And I think that he thought the best method to do that was to really just steel man other people's arguments as much as possible. Certainly critique them, but also use them wherever he could in hopes to bring them along. And that's what I think he's trying to do in the philosophy of revelation, in large measure, is trying to show how so much of what they've been searching for instance, in the history of religion school and religious studies, as an example, has failed. He wants to say a lot of what your efforts are commendable, but you failed. And the reason you failed is because you don't understand that you can't get behind religion, because the reason religion exists is because God's revealed himself. But he tried to do it in such a way that wasn't as didn't push the and as much in a lot of the text. And I think that was for the sake of almost an apologetic evangelistic type effort at times. He was also a national figure in the Netherlands in his late career. And so he was being read. I mean, his works were showing up in reviews in the primary national newspaper out of Amsterdam that everybody was going to read. And they were being reviewed and interacted with by the chairs of all the major universities. And so there was I think there's something in that. I mean, of course, we can say the same thing about Kuyper, who always needed an opponent. Kuyper's theology really develops as a theology of opposition. I mean, he needs to have somebody that he's defining himself against. That's kind of oftentimes the way we see his theology developing. Bavinck did that, to be sure. And he says, even in the original foreword of the Reformed Dogmatics, that a theologian must engage in polemics. And for him, in the 19th century, he thought of the contemporary Roman Catholicism culture as one of the primary traditions he needed to really push back against post-Vatican I Roman Catholicism, for example. But you're right. I mean, there's certainly a difference in my mind, and I'd love to hear y'all's thoughts about this, between the style in Van Til, in Machen, and in Kuyper, and then the style we see in Bavinck. And I do think a lot of it's driven by personality.